The war that should have ended everything. Picture the shoreline at dawn, smoke crawling across it like a wounded animal, the fjord exhaling a cold that gnaws bone, ravens circling as if the sky itself were a wound. If you've ever stood in a room after a fight and heard only your own breathing, you already know this place. Steel mutters. Shields groan in the frost. And between two ridges of rock and snow, the last clash of Ravnskull and Eiríksson tears the morning in half. Einar runs low and fast. Breath clipped. Eyes hard. He was raised to read a battlefield the way other men read runes. Angles, distances, breaks in the line. He keeps his brother's leather thong around his wrist, knotted twice, and each time his fingers brush it, something inside him tightens. Don't flinch. Don't pause. Close the gap. Break the shield. He moves like a hammer thrown by an angry god. Spears flash. The ground is a map of churned mud, trampled grass, and shattered hafts. You can taste iron in the air. You can hear prayer, though no one is praying. Ravnskull red burns against Eiríksson blue like twin fires clawing the same fuel. Hold, someone cries to Einar's left. Hold. He doesn't. He drives through. He knows exactly what he's hunting, and it isn't glory. It has a face, the face that stared back when his brother went still 3 winters ago. Tall. Braided beard. A slanting scar that pulls one corner of the mouth. Eiriksson's warlord. Not their chieftain. No, the chieftain stays behind walls, but the fist of their clan. Einar has chased that face through memories that don't sleep. He collides with the line. Shield slam. The wooden rims bite into his forearm. He leans, twists, forces an opening, and there, he sees the scar. The world pinpoints. Sound narrows to a hum. Einar steps in. The scarred man turns. This is it. The moment you dream of and fear, the moment that steals you from yourself. They trade blows so quick the eye can't keep up. Hilt. Elbow. Mud leaps. The sky wheels. Einar hears his name shouted from somewhere behind him and ignores it. He feints low, draws the guard down, and the next strike lands true enough to break a promise. The line buckles around them. Ravnskull voices surge. Eiríksson ranks waver. The fjord throws back the noise in a ragged echo, like a choir that has forgotten the melody. Einar stands over the man who taught him to hate mornings. There is no triumph in him. Only a silence that stretches too far, a silence that tastes like cold ash. If you were with him now, you'd want to speak. You wouldn't. You'd swallow and stare at your boots. By midday the banners sag. By midday the ravens sit heavy. By midday the field is not a field but a ledger. Debts settled, debts suspended, debts that will cost more to pay than anyone has left to spend. The Ravnskull chieftain, Grettir One Eye, calls the horn. It's a raw, cracked sound. Men turn because they have to. The Eiríksson horn answers after a long space that feels like a held breath. Between them is a ridge and a drift of snow stained a color that never truly washes out. Truces are born in such places, not of goodwill but of gravity. Bring the prisoners, Grettir orders. Einar wipes his blade on the edge of his cloak and goes because his feet know the path before his mind does. Prisoners, yes. Eiríksson fighters who threw down shields, a few boys with fear still clinging to their faces, 2 elders, 1 wounded shield maiden, teeth bared against pain, and at the end of the line, chin up, eyes steady, a woman with hair like straw left to winter's sun. No ropes on her wrists. She doesn't need them. Everyone is watching her. Who is she? Einar asks quietly. Don't you recognize blood when you see it? Answers Stig, his friend since they were both too short for male. Astrid Eric's daughter. The chieftain's own. A hush ripples. Even wind seems to listen. Astrid stands at the center of it like a flame cupped in cold hands. There is a narrow circlet at her brow, dulled by soot. Her cloak is torn, lined in fox fur darkened by the morning. Her gaze drifts to the fjord and then back to Grettir as if drawing a line only she can see. Einar's chest tightens without permission. Rage wants to rise, to speak his brother's name like a challenge thrown at the sky. But something in her face stalls it. Not fear. Not arrogance. Something quieter. Or older. The parley happens on the ridge, where the snow is thinner and rock shows through like a spine. Grettir one eye. Two Eiriksen elders in cloaks of woven blue. Einar stands a pace behind his chieftain, close enough to smell the pine pitch clinging to Grettir's leathers. He keeps his gaze on the elders, but his peripheral vision tracks Astrid. Every small movement. The lift of a shoulder. The way her hands are still even when the wind cuts. Enough, Grettir says. We can spend the rest of the winter feeding crows, or we can choose to keep our children alive. The eldest Eiriksen speaks like someone counting coins at dusk. You've taken our shore. We still hold the high pastures. Keep what your boots cover. Let us keep what our goats know. We will pay Wergild for those who fell by our spears. Grettir's mouth twitches. We will take Wergild. He lifts his chin at Astrid. And we will take Shurdi. A murmur. Stig shifts beside Einar. The elders stiffen. Astrid doesn't move. Name it, the old man says. Blood binds what words cannot, Grettir replies. He sweeps a hand to the field, to the torn banners, to the men pretending their hands don't shake. We seal this with a union. Your chieftain's daughter. My clan's spear. Silence falls with weight. You can feel the drop in your stomach as if you've stepped off into dark water. Einar doesn't breathe for a count of 3. Then 5. Then he does because his body forces him to. Einar, Grettir says without looking back. Step forward. He steps. The cliff's edge feels close even though it isn't. He hears Stig swear softly. He hears a gull cry over the fjord like something laughing at a bad time. Astrid turns her head and looks at him full for the first time. Her eyes are not winter water. There's something colder. Something that remembers. He remembers too, nights without sleep, his mother's thin face after his brother was carried home, the oath he swore to the dark. I will not stop. I will not bend. The war that should have ended everything. Picture the shoreline at dawn, smoke crawling across it like a wounded animal, the fjord exhaling a cold that gnaws bone, ravens circling as if the sky itself were a wound. If you've ever stood in a room after a fight and heard only your own breathing, you already know this place. Steel mutters. Shields groan in the frost. And between two ridges of rock and snow, the last clash of Ravnskull and Eiriksen tears the morning in half. Einar runs low and fast. Breath clipped. Eyes hard. He was raised to read a battlefield the way other men read runes. Angles, distances, breaks in the line. He keeps his brother's leather thong around his wrist, knotted twice, and each time his fingers brush it, something inside him tightens. Don't flinch. Don't pause. Close the gap. Break the shield. He moves like a hammer thrown by an angry god. Spears flash. The ground is a map of churned mud, trampled grass, and shattered hafts. You can taste iron in the air. You can hear prayer, though no one is praying. Ravnskull red burns against Eiriksen blue like twin fires clawing the same fuel. Hold, someone cries to Einar's left. Hold. He doesn't. He drives through. He knows exactly what he's hunting, and it isn't glory. It has a face, the face that stared back when his brother went still 3 winters ago. Tall. Braided beard. A slanting scar that pulls one corner of the mouth. Eiriksen's warlord. Not their chieftain. No, the chieftain stays behind walls, but the fist of their clan. Einar has chased that face through memories that don't sleep. He collides with the line. Shields slam. The wooden rims bite into his forearm. He leans, twists, forces an opening, and there he sees the scar. The world pinpoints. Sound narrows to a hum. Einar steps in. The scarred man turns. This is it. The moment you dream of and fear, the moment that steals you from yourself. They trade blows so quick the eye can't keep up. Hilt. Elbow. Mud leaps. The sky wheels. Einar hears his name shouted from somewhere behind him and ignores it. He feints low, draws the guard down, and the next strike lands true enough to break a promise. The line buckles around them. Ravenskull voices surge. Eriksson ranks waver. The fjord throws back the noise in a ragged echo, like a choir that has forgotten the melody. Einar stands over the man who taught him to hate mornings. There is no triumph in him. Only a silence that stretches too far, a silence that tastes like cold ash. If you were with him now, you'd want to speak. You wouldn't. You'd swallow and stare at your boots. By midday the banners sag. By midday the ravens sit heavy. By midday the field is not a field but a ledger. Debts settled, debts suspended, debts that will cost more to pay than anyone has left to spend. The Ravenskull chieftain Grettir One Eye calls the horn. It's a raw, cracked sound. Men turn because they have to. The Eriksson horn answers after a long space that feels like a held breath. Between them is a ridge and a drift of snow stained a color that never truly washes out. Truces are born in such places, not of goodwill but of gravity. Bring the prisoners, Grettir orders. Einar wipes his blade on the edge of his cloak and goes because his feet know the path before his mind does. Prisoners, yes. Eriksson fighters who threw down shields, a few boys with fear still clinging to their faces, 2 elders, 1 wounded shield maiden, teeth bared against pain, and at the end of the line, chin up, eyes steady, a woman with hair like straw left to winter's sun. No ropes on her wrists. She doesn't need them. Everyone is watching her. Who is she? Einar asks quietly. Don't you recognize blood when you see it? Answers Stig, his friend since they were both too short for mail. Astrid Eric's daughter. The chieftain's own. A hush ripples. Even wind seems to listen. Astrid stands at the center of it like a flame cupped in cold hands. There is a narrow circlet at her brow, dulled by soot. Her cloak is torn, lined in fox fur darkened by the morning. Her gaze drifts to the fjord and then back to Grettir as if drawing a line only she can see. Einar's chest tightens without permission. Rage wants to rise, to speak his brother's name like a challenge thrown at the sky. But something in her face stalls it. Not fear. Not arrogance. Something quieter. Or older. The parley happens on the ridge, where the snow is thinner and rock shows through like a spine. Grettir One Eye. 2 Eriksson elders in cloaks of woven blue. Einar stands a pace behind his chieftain, close enough to smell the pine pitch clinging to Grettir's leathers. He keeps his gaze on the elders but his peripheral vision tracks Astrid. Every small movement. The lift of a shoulder. The way her hands are still even when the wind cuts. Enough, Grettir says. We can spend the rest of the winter feeding crows, or we can choose to keep our children alive. The eldest Eriksson speaks like someone counting coins at dusk. You've taken our shore. We still hold the high pastures. Keep what your boots cover. Let us keep what our goats know. We will pay Wergild for those who fell by our spears. Grettir's mouth twitches. We will take Wergild. He lifts his chin at Astrid. And we will take Shurdi. A murmur. Stig shifts beside Einar. The elders stiffen. Astrid doesn't move. Name it, the old man says. Blood binds what words cannot, Grettir replies. He sweeps a hand to the field, to the torn banners, to the men pretending their hands don't shake. We seal this with a union. Your chieftain's daughter. My clan's spear. Silence falls with weight. You can feel the drop in your stomach as if you've stepped off into dark water. Einar doesn't breathe for a count of 3. Then 5. Then he does because his body forces him to. Einar, Grettir says without looking back. Step forward. He steps. The cliff's edge feels close even though it isn't. He hears Stig swear softly. He hears a gull cry over the fjord like something laughing at a bad time. Astrid turns her head and looks at him full for the first time. Her eyes are not winter water. There's something colder. Something that remembers. He remembers too, nights without sleep, his mother's thin face after his brother was carried home, the oath he swore to the dark. I will not stop. I will not bend. Take what you want from me, Einar says to Grettir, voice low, words meant for a leader and the gods and the mud beneath their boots. But don't ask me to honor them. They are us now, Grettir answers. Or we are dead. Choose. There it is. The fulcrum. The kind of choice you tell yourself is impossible until it sits on your tongue like a bitter berry and you have to bite. Vengeance burns hot and brief. Peace burns slow and long. Which fire are you willing to hold? Astrid speaks, voice clear enough to carry without being loud. My father will not refuse. He knows the numbers. He knows the winter. She looks at the elders and they nod because they have walked through too many seasons to pretend pride feeds anyone. But you should hear this from me. Her gaze returns to Einar. If you think taking me will buy your peace without cost, you do not understand the accounts that gods keep. It's not threat. It's not plea. It is ledger speech. Einar feels it the way you feel a storm an hour away, a pressure shift you can't name. The elders set terms for cattle, for silver, for where Ravenskull lines end and Eiriksson lines start, for who mends the broken boundary stone, for how the fishing waters will be shared when the ice thins. And then, like this was always the sentence the paragraph was leaning toward, they agree to the bond. The funeral waits until sunset. It has to. Both clans stand in a crescent along the shoreline where the ice drifts like ghost ships. Fires are built from salt wet wood that hisses and smokes. Names are spoken. Names are swallowed by wind. Einar carries his brother's memory like a weight you don't set down even to sleep. He stands with Stig and the others and watches the longboats slide toward the mouth of the fjord, each carrying its share of steel, cloth, and silence. If you've ever written a message you never sent and burned it, you know this ritual. Let go, the elders say with their hands. Hold tighter, the heart answers anyway. When the last flame thins, Grettir speaks again. We lay down the old debt. We lift a new one. He turns to Einar. Tomorrow we bind you. The camp divides into small fires. Men drink to forget and to remember. Laughter stumbles. Sobs hide. Einar sits on a half-buried boulder and sharpens the edge that doesn't need sharpening. Stig drops beside him, wraps a wool cloak tighter, studies the blade and the man holding it. You didn't ask for this, Stig says. No one asks for winter either, Einar answers. You going to call it peace? Stig pokes the ash with a stick. Because it looks like a wound stitched with wire. Einar lets himself breathe the smoke. Peace isn't a song. It's a scar. Some days it aches. Some days you forget it's there. He glances toward the far fire where Astrid sits among a cluster of Eiriksson women, profile cut sharp against the glow. Either way you live with it. Stig follows his gaze. She's not afraid. No, Einar says. She's something else. Cold? Decided. Stig is quiet a moment. Your brother would have mocked this. My brother mocked everything, Einar says, and the words almost turn into a laugh and then don't. He rubs the leather thong. He also knew when to stop swinging. Did he? Einar doesn't answer. The wind does. It sifts ash off the coals and throws sparks up like sudden stars. Somewhere a lute starts and stops. A child cries and is hushed. Someone calls for another skin of mead in a voice that wants to be brave. Before dawn the elders mark the place for the binding. A ring of stones just above the tittle-line, old as any story anyone remembers right. Gulls draw white knives against the sky. The air feels cleansed and raw. Astrid is brought forward by two women who carry themselves like those who have learned to do hard things without complaint. She wears a cloak the color of storm clouds, fox fur at the collar, a thin torque at her throat. Her hair is braided, not for beauty but for order. Grettir raises a hand. The murmurs die. Hear this, he calls to both clans. We dragged our children through winters sharpened by pride. We hammered our names into each other's doors. Enough. Today Ravenskull and Eiriksson strap a new haft to this old axe. If you cannot bless it, don't curse it. If you cannot drink to it, don't spit. The binding is simple. It's all simple things that are impossible. Stand, speak, touch, swear. Einar steps into the ring, boots crunching on salt frost. Astrid steps in from the opposite side, measured sure. She meets his eyes as one warrior meets another, not as a prize meets a claimant. The elder from each clan ties a red thread around their wrists, a loop that binds both hands together when they face each other. Words are said, about harvests not soaked in grief, about children who will ask for stories that end differently, about the sea taking what it is owed but not more than that. Einar Gretarsson, the Ravenskull elder, intones. Do you swear to keep the piece you hold in your hand? Einar looks down at the thread, cutting a neat mark into his skin. He looks up at Astrid. He hears his mother's voice, thin as the smoking wick of a candle, telling him that strength is not the same as noise. I swear, he says. The words feel like iron swallowed. Astrid Eriksdottir, the Eriksson elder, says. Do you swear to hold your oath even when it bites? Astrid's jaw lifts a fraction. I swear. And because this is the North, and because the gods here don't accept ink and signatures, the elders lift their knives and draw brief lines across the thread-bound wrists. Red beads rise. Red meets red where their hands touch. The thread drinks and darkens. You can feel the entire circle lean forward, not to see blood but to see if the world shifts. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it pretends not to and then moves under your feet anyway. When it's done, when the thread is tied off and cut, when the breath everyone held goes out in a ragged of relief and doubt, the clans break apart into motion again, each man and woman inventing their task on the spot so they don't have to think too hard. Einar stands a moment longer in the ring. Astrid doesn't move. He realizes they are alone at the center, and then he realizes they are not alone at all. He speaks first because someone must. My people will build you a lodge by the western birches. It's closer to the water. You'll hear the whales when the season turns. She studies him as if measuring a weight. And your people will watch me when I go to the shore. Yes. They will assume I am a spy. They will assume many things, he says. Assumptions are easy. Winter is not. A ghost of something moves at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. Not yet. You fight with sentences the way you fight with steel, she says. Short. Cutting. Long ones get tangled, he replies. She nods once as if he has passed a test she didn't announce. Then let's not tangle. She steps back, gathers her cloak closer, and turns toward the western birches without waiting for escort, which earns her a dozen looks and half a dozen whispered opinions. Einar watches her go and feels a thread he didn't consent to tighten between his ribs. All day he helps raise the lodge. He hauls beam and bark, heaves stones into the hearth pit, knots rope until his fingers sting. Work is the only prayer that makes sense when the world leans. Stig jokes badly and gets quieter when Einar doesn't answer. By evening the rough frame stands, a rib cage against the reddening sky. Smoke from a first test fire writes its thin script into the wind. The ceremony ends where it began, at the shore. They give the last of the fallen to the sea with a chant that climbs and drops like a tired heart. The sun lies down behind a bank of cloud. Lanterns gutter to life around the encampment, small planets in a cold galaxy. Einar walks the boundary once more, the way a shepherd walks a fence he knows too well. He stops near the western birches where the new lodge is a square shadow among others. Astrid is there, standing in the doorway without crossing the threshold, as if the line between outside and inside is a river she refuses to ford without reason. The lantern near her makes her eyes look like polished stone. He waits for her to speak. She doesn't. The silence stretches until it becomes something present, like a third person between them. If you need wood, he says, ask for Stig. He'll bring it. He owes me more favors than he remembers. I remember all my debts, she answers. Good, he says, and hates that it sounds like approval and hates that he cares. A gust from the fjord lifts the edge of her cloak. For a heartbeat in the shifting light, Einar thinks he sees something etched inside the lining. Marks that look like a path the sun once took across a winter sky. He blinks and there is only fur and fabric. Rest, he says, because there is nothing else that fits without tearing. Tomorrow we start the work that lasts. Astrid tilts her head a fraction. Tomorrow, she echoes, and her voice carries none of the softness people expect from a bride on the night after vows. It carries decision. It carries a door closing gently and irrevocably. She steps back into the dark of the lodge, and the lantern flame dims in the draught. Einar doesn't follow. He stands and lets the cold speak through his cloak. The sea breathes. Somewhere behind him Stig calls his name and leaves it there, a question without an answer. He turns at last, slow, and in that last glance over his shoulder he catches Astrid's face framed by shadow. Eyes level, mouth unreadable, all warmth carefully packed away for a winter she plans to survive. Cold. And yet, there is a depth there that doesn't belong to fear. He recognizes it because it lives in him too, the look of someone who has already traded with fate and is waiting to see the bill. The bride of the enemy. Say it out loud and feel how the words resist your tongue. In the Ravenskull camp, people wear their distrust like extra armor. Eyes follow her as she walks. Not openly hostile. Not welcoming either. A narrow corridor of glances opens in front of Astrid and closes behind her like water around a blade. She moves through it with an odd calm, the kind you learn when fear can't help you anymore. Beautiful, yes, sharp-cheeked, storm-eyed, light hair braided with a strip of blue cloth scorched at the edge. But beauty is not what makes people quiet. It's the sense that she has brought weather with her, a private winter folded close to her ribs. Einar notices the little things first. How she thanks the women who bring wool and salt without bending her voice too low, as if courtesy, not apology, is what's owed. How she drinks water like it's more difficult than mead. How she pauses a heartbeat at thresholds, any threshold, as if measuring what price it demands to cross. He tells himself these are the habits of any stranger in hostile territory. He keeps watching anyway. Work continues because work must. The lodge grows ribs, flesh, skin. Astrid helps when help is asked, and when it's not she stands to one side and learns the rhythm of the place. When knives are set down, when fires are stoked, when gossip fattens or thins. Children stare from behind their mother's skirts. One little boy loses a game of courage with himself and steps out to hand her a knot of spruce gum. Astrid takes it, wraps his fingers briefly with hers and says something too soft to catch. The boy runs away as if daring himself to fly. Around them voices murmur. Names traded in low registers, old fears unspooled like twine. You hear it if you listen, cursed, bound, marked. Men who've never seen a wardstone swear they know the taste of one. Women recall an ancestor who wore a rune against her heart and never warmed again. Stig feeds Einar the headlines with that crooked half-grin of his. She's walked the barrow path. She's eaten with the draugr. Her mother was a sea hag. Pick one. Or all. People like full baskets. People like air, Einar says. They'll breathe whatever is around them. And what do you breathe? Her silence? He answers before he can stop himself. Silence is expensive, Stig mutters. Someone always pays for it. Toward evening the sky bruises. Wind comes off the fjord in wet gusts that stencil chill across the skin. The lodge smokes for a while and then doesn't. Astrid stands in the doorway as she did the night before, measuring inside versus outside as if the choice matters more than the wood and wool under her hands. Einar brings a bundle of driftwood, throws it down by the hearth, sets the kindling like a puzzle he's solved 1,000 times, flint, steel, spark, breath. Flames lift with a low hoof and begin their patient work of turning wood into seconds. Will you eat? He asks without looking up. I will, she says, which is not the same as yes. He sets out 2 rough bowls, fish stew thick with barley, the kind you have to respect with a spoon because it has its own opinions. They sit on opposite sides of the fire, not close, not far. The light throws them up in halves, cheek and jaw, hand and wrist, a profile blown thin or thick by the breath of the flames. Outside, voices rise and drop, a loom weaving what happened today into what will be said tomorrow. You're quiet, Einar says, and then here's how foolish it sounds. He wanted to say something else, something that would open a door neither of them will name. I have learned to use fewer words, Astrid replies. They weigh. What do they buy? Time, she says simply. And sometimes, mercy. He nods. He knows too well the cost of both. There is a knot in the room no one admits to. It is tied from the way her eyes keep flicking to the lintel beam, and the way his knuckles press a little too wide around the spoon, and the way the fire has a dry high note that signals it wants a different kind of wood. He adds a split log. The note vanishes. The knot stays. Across the settlement, old women trade older stories. Not Eriksson stories, no, Ravenskall ones bent to fit the moment. Once there was a girl who sang by a wardstone, and the wind changed its mind about a storm. Once there was a man who carved his name in a pine and woke to find the pine had written it back on his chest. Once a bride spoke her vows and the fire went dark because fire knows when it is a witness to something it cannot bless. Rumor is a hand that can't stop scratching where it once itched. Listen, Stig had told Einar at dusk, voice pitched for ears and nobody else. They think she's bound to old letters. That she carries the kind of promise you can't wash off. Do you believe it? Stig's grin faded. I believe you don't want to find out the hard way. In the lodge, Astrid finishes half her stew. Einar finishes all of his because he is a man who believes in finishing what is in front of him. She sets the bowl aside with care that has nothing to do with clay. May I keep my own knife? She asks. The question has the shape of a courtesy and the spine of a dare. You may, he says. On one condition. She arches a brow. You don't use it on my people. Or yourself. He hates how the last word carries weight. That was 2 conditions, she replies, and then after a beat, agreed. She unlaces her boot, draws a slim blade from a hidden sheath, and places it beside the hearth within easy reach, not concealed. A message then. I have teeth. I'm not here to chew you. He nods once. Some bridges are planks laid side by side. Some are only 2 people deciding not to fall. A lull. The kind that makes you hear echoes from far off. Gulls over the black water, a laugh turned into a cough, a snatch of fiddle that dies as quickly as a spark. Astrid pulls her cloak tighter, not from cold he thinks but from the sensation of being seen. Einar rubs his thumb over the leather thong at his wrist, the older oath that still rubs the skin there raw some days. Your brother? She says quietly, eyes on the flame. Not a question. A compass. He was fire before he was a person, Einar answers. Made rooms brighter. Made them hotter. Sometimes made them burn down. He swallows. He shouldn't have gone at dawn. He did anyway. I'm sorry, she says, and the words are not the ones you offer a stranger. They have structure. Memory inside them. I know the way a name feels when you can't put it down. Outside, a clutch of boys passes, chanting a rhyme about warded brides that their grandmothers would pretend not to know. Einar wants to open the door and silence them with a look. He doesn't. He is new to this role and old to its demands. Pride is not protection. Discipline is. Do they sing the same about you? Astrid asks. They sing worse, he says, and a corner of his mouth lifts without permission. They call me the hammer that forgot how to be a hand. And did you? I'm trying to remember. She studies him for a heartbeat with something that might be approval or might be cataloging. Then she leans in a fraction, as if the fire were telling a secret to the log and she wanted to overhear it. There is a sheen in her eyes that is not tears. It is light reflected off some internal surface he can't name. Do you ever feel, she says, voice almost too low to catch, like you are walking on a path that was carved before you were born? And the dirt remembers every foot, not just yours. All the time, he says. And I keep walking. Why? Because stopping there would be a different kind of obedience. Her breath leaves her in something like a laugh. Something like grief. Night thickens. Wind kneads the lodge until the beams creak like old men telling each other they still have work to do. The fire sinks to a red bed and then finds its breath again. Einar lays fresh wood with the gentleness of a caretaker. Astrid stands, moves to the doorway, opens it a hand's breadth, and listens. Not for voices. For the shore. The rhythm of water on stone is a cadence older than any treaty. She closes the door as if closing a page whose words she knows by heart. Rest, Einar says, repeating his own unsteady prayer from the night before. If the women were cruel to you today, tell me. I'll ask the men to tell their wives better stories. They were not cruel, Astrid says. They were careful. Care is a kind of cruelty when you're the object of it. He does not disagree. He rolls out a sleeping pallet near the hearth, nods to the corner where another one waits. She settles there, cloak for pillow, eyes on the ceiling. He lies down and watches the fire through half-lidded eyes until the red spreads and thins like ink in water. That is when she moves. Not loud. Not furtive either. The way you move when your steps arose. She rises, feet soft as a cat's, and goes to the far wall where a low chest sits under a shelf of carved spoons. Einar stays still. He listens. The skin of the night tightens. Astrid kneels. She presses her palm to a knot in the beam. The movement is small. Practiced. Something clicks. No sound to a casual ear, but he is a hunter of sounds. A sliver of wood at the baseboard yields, barely, like a mouth about to utter a name. She reaches into the gap and draws out a small bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Einar doesn't move. Not yet. Curiosity bites. Duty stiffens its back. He tells his breath to slow, and it obeys because it's learned that trick. She unwraps the bundle with a care that has nothing to do with fragility and everything to do with reverence. Inside lies a strip of leather, old as an old song, and on it, carved into bone as thin as a fingernail, a sequence of marks that make his eyes ache. Runes, yes, but not the market stall kind. Not the ward for luck hung over infant cradles. These have depth. They seem to sit in more than one place at once, as if the bone remembers the bone it came from and the hand that carved it and the breath that fogged the carver's lip. You know that feeling, right? When you're looking at a map and the map looks back. Astrid bows her head, lips moving. The words are older than their clothing. Older than the timber around them. They fall into the room like drops of oil into water, separate, slick, changing the surface of everything. The flames nudge higher, then lower, then steady again as if listening. The smoke loses its bite and gains a sweetness like resin warmed between fingers. Einar thinks of the murmurs, the old women, the boys' mean chant, Stig's warning. He thinks of Grettir's single eye, the way it seems to inventory the world and lay it out like tools. He thinks of his mother, who believed more in bread than in blessings and yet tied a small sign into the hem of his cloak on the day he first carried a shield. We pretend we don't believe, he tells himself. We always believe when the room is dark. Astrid's voice changes. Softer now. Not a prayer. A promise spoken to an audience that doesn't need light to see. The runic bones gleam at their edges as if they have caught a piece of lightning and decided to keep it. Her shoulders tremble in a way that has nothing to do with cold. She presses the bones to her sternum and breathes in once, long, like someone who has been underwater and sees the line of the surface. Something in Einar gives way. Not suspicion. Not exactly. The part of a man that knows another human's breaking point by ear. He sits up. The pallet creaks. Her head snaps up. Their eyes catch like flint and steel. He doesn't reach for his sword. He doesn't need one here. His voice is quiet and straight. What are you asking for? She considers a lie. He watches that decision cross her face and leave again. For the sea to take what it takes, she says. And nothing more. You could ask that without bones. I could ask for summer and winter too, she says. Some things require a language that metal understands. He stands slowly, palms open. The fire hisses. The room contracts around the two of them and the small space on the floor where the runes drink light. If you mean harm. I would not do it under your roof, she says, voice tightening on the ear like a cut that reveals more than blood. I am not a fool or a coward. Then what are you? Tired, she says, and the word lands like a stone that knows the bottom. I am what my people needed the day your people lit the first torch. He hears the sentence behind the sentence. He doesn't press. He kneels. Not to the bones. To be at her height. The gestures you make matter. Say your words, he tells her. I won't stop you. Why? Because I don't want to know what happens if you don't finish them. Her mouth shifts. There is gratitude there and something else, anger at being grateful. She nods once and lowers her head. The old syllables return, slower now, each one laid like a plank over water. The fire breathes with her. The wind outside leans away from the walls a fraction, as if giving the lodge a pocket of quiet. Einar doesn't look at the marks directly. He lets them sit at the corner of his sight, where meanings are less prone to breaking. When she is done, Astrid kisses the bones. Not a lover's kiss. A sign. She wraps them again, seals the cloth with a twist, and slides the bundle back into its hiding place. The knot in the beam drinks her palm. The baseboard closes its mouth. The room exhales. She stays kneeling. The strength that held her spine straight for hours melts like ice in a warm hand. Her face turns toward the shadow under the shelf where the line of wall meets floor. There, scratched faintly into the grain, almost invisible unless you know where to look, is a single rune no one bothered to sand out when the lodge was built. It is the shape of a path that forks, then forks again, then runs into a circle that looks like a snare. Astrid lifts her fingers to it, not touching, only hovering as if her hand might learn its story from heat alone. Her breath shudders. Not from fear. From the recognition of an old friend you never wanted to see again. Tears brim. She does not hide them. They slide 2, 3 and drop onto the wood where the rune waits. The firelight catches the wet and makes it shine like lacquer. Einar speaks because silence now would be a cruelty he refuses. Who put that there? He asks, but softly, the way you ask a child where it hurts. The first time I walked into a room like this, she whispers, I was 12. She blinks the remnants away and swallows, voice gathering thread by thread. And I learned how a promise can be carved where no one sees and govern everything that happens under it. He doesn't fully understand, not yet. He understands enough. He reaches out and sets his hand, palm down, on the floor beside the mark. Not covering it. Close. A counterweight. She looks at his hand. Then at him. Something eases a shade inside her gaze. Sleep, he says, and now the word isn't instruction. It's a shelter he's offering without knowing how to build it. She nods and lies down on her pallet. He returns to his, listens to the flames settle, listens to the wind shoulder the walls again, listens to the slow, uneven breath of a woman who carries a private winter and refuses to let it freeze her. Above them, the rune in the wood dries. It holds its silence. It keeps its account. And while the camp outside keeps watch with knives and stories, Einar stares into the dark and counts 7 nights with the kind of dread that feels a lot like hope. The ice began to crack, not loudly, not suddenly, but in quiet places where the thaw always starts. Days turned into a rhythm neither of them had planned. Shared silences, brief exchanges, a growing familiarity stitched together by necessity. What had begun as a political bond began to feel like something that breathed. Einar would find her by the shoreline at dawn, her hair loose, her hands tracing symbols in the sand before the tide erased them. When he asked what they meant, she only said, "They are not prayers. They're reminders." He didn't ask of what. Inside the lodge, she tended to the wounded from both clans without hesitation. Even the old warriors who once called her, which lowered their eyes in shame when she touched their scars and whispered words that felt like warmth. There was no fear in her gentleness, only purpose. And Einar, who had spent a lifetime believing that strength was forged in fire, began to see it now in water. One night, as they sat by the fire, Astrid spoke of the gods as though she had known them personally. "Do you know why Odin keeps his ravens?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the flames. "To spy on men," Einar said, half smiling. She shook her head. No. To remember what he has lost. Thought and memory, that's what they are. But there is a third one no one names. The one who reminds him what cannot be changed. He stared at her then, the flicker of fire catching the edges of her face. And what cannot be changed? She met his eyes. Death. After that, the ravens began to appear. First one perched on the roof beam. Then two side by side on the birches near the lodge. They didn't move when Einar threw stones or shouted. They only watched, patient, deliberate. The clan whispered that the gods were taking interest, that this marriage was marked. And then came the dreams. Einar would wake before dawn, breath sharp, sweat cold. Always the same vision. A woman standing on a cliff, her back to him, her dress torn by the wind. She turns, but it isn't Astrid. It's someone wearing her face, older, distant, eyes like obsidian. She lifts her hand and blood runs down her wrist, spilling into the sea that rises to swallow them both. The third morning he found a wound on his arm, shallow but real, in the exact place where the dream woman bled. He said nothing. Not to Astrid. Not to anyone. But he began to wonder if the gods were testing him, or warning him. Still the days softened. She laughed once, a short, surprised sound, like something that had forgotten how to live inside her. It came when Einar burned the bread and tried to hide it under a new layer of flour. Even warriors lie poorly, she teased. And witches bake poorly, he countered. For a heartbeat, they were just two souls caught between wars they hadn't chosen. At night, Astrid would tell him stories, not the sagas sung in the longhouses, but the ones whispered by women who had seen too much. She spoke of Freya's tears that turned to gold, of a god who gave up his heartbeat to stop a storm. And every story, Einar realized, carried a shadow of warning, a hint of sacrifice. Once, when she thought he was asleep, she stood over him and brushed her fingers just above the wound on his arm. Her lips moved soundlessly, a word older than mercy. He opened his eyes and she froze. "You were dreaming," she whispered. "I was," he replied. "But not anymore." Outside, thunder rolled over the fjord. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and iron. The storm was building. The sky split with light, and for a brief moment, the world was carved in white fire. Einar stepped closer. Astrid didn't move. The distance between them felt alive, electric, trembling with something neither of them could name. "Tell me," he said softly. "What are you hiding from me?" She lifted her chin, rain dripping from her lashes. "Not hiding," she said. "Protecting." "From what?" "From the price of peace." Lightning struck so close that the ground shuddered beneath them. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Their fingers met, and it was like the world exhaled. The rain came in sheets, the sky roaring above them, and when she looked at him, her eyes held both grief and defiance. He kissed her, not gently, not like a promise, but like a question without an answer. The storm howled, waves breaking against the rocks, and for a heartbeat the gods themselves seemed to hold their breath. Then the vision came. Through the lightning's flash, he saw it, Astrid standing not before him but beyond him, her hair whipping in the wind, her hands covered in blood that glowed like molten gold. Behind her, the ravens circled, their cries echoing through the thunder. She looked at him once more, eyes hollow, voice breaking the air in his skull. 7 nights, she said. That's all the gods allow. And when the storm passed, Einar was alone, her warmth still on his lips, her words carved into the dark like a curse that had finally spoken its name. The storm left the world in silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that lingers after something sacred has been disturbed. The kind that listens. 3 mornings later, Einar found it. A folded piece of leather hidden beneath Astrid's cloak, tucked between 2 layers of fur as if it were part of the lining. It wasn't large, but it was old, older than any carving he'd ever seen. The symbols burned faintly, the way iron glows after it's been taken from the forge. At first he thought it was a charm, another of her strange tokens. But when he unrolled it, he saw the shape of the fjord, drawn in lines so precise they could only have been traced by someone who had walked its depths. And at its heart, beneath the cliffs and ice, a mark shaped like an eye. The ink shimmered when he touched it. For a heartbeat he thought he heard something, a low, distant sound like stone grinding on stone. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of that map like a blade across his chest. Astrid's breathing was soft, even, but her hands, resting over her heart, trembled as if guarding something. When dawn came, he rose without a word. He packed a torch, a rope, his axe, and the map. And he went to the water. The fjord was still, too still. Mist hung low, veiling the world in silver. He followed the path carved between the cliffs until he reached a narrow gap half hidden by moss and shadow. The sound he'd heard before, the grinding, came again, faint but steady as if the earth itself remembered. The air grew colder as he descended. The torch hissed in the damp, casting trembling light on the walls slick with salt and age. Symbols, the same runes Astrid had whispered in the lodge, were carved into the rock. Only now they glowed faintly, alive with breath he couldn't see. When he reached the end of the passage he stopped. The cave opened into a vast hollow beneath the waterline. At its center, half buried in stone, lay something that didn't belong to any world he knew. A blade, massive and pale, forged not of metal but of something that looked like light frozen solid. Around it bones, old, ancient, human and not. And carved into the rock beside it, a name. Freya. Einar. Her voice echoed behind him, soft, trembling, real. He turned sharply, torch lifting, and there she was, cloaked damp with sea mist, hair clinging to her face. You followed me. I had to, she said. Her eyes darted to the weapon. You shouldn't have come here. What is this place? His voice was hard, but beneath it, fear was growing roots. What is that? She hesitated, and then the truth came like a confession dragged from the throat of a ghost. The heart of the war, she whispered. And the end of it. Einar stepped closer. Speak plainly, Astrid. She exhaled, shaking. The night my father ordered the last raid. I went to the shrine in the mountain. I begged the gods to stop it. I begged Freya for peace, for the killing to end. Her voice cracked. And she answered. Einar felt his pulse in his temples. You made a pact. Astrid nodded slowly. I offered her part of myself, my voice, my life, my soul, whatever she asked, so the war would burn itself out. And she gave me her terms. Blood must meet blood. 2 lines bound together, through union, not battle. A wedding between the clans, sealed by sacrifice. Einar's breath caught. The torchlight wavered. You mean? He stepped back. Our marriage. You offered me to the gods. Her eyes glistened. I didn't know it would be you. Only that the chosen warrior would carry both vengeance and mercy in his heart. Freya chose you, not me. Rage flared, sharp and raw. So I'm what? An offering? A name on your altar? No, she moved toward him. You were the answer. I thought I'd damned us both. But the gods took pity, they gave us time. 7 nights to love freely before the vow comes due. Einar laughed, bitter, breaking. Love? You call this love? Yes, she said. Because I didn't plan it. Because I tried to stop it. And because it happened anyway. The words hit him harder than any blade. For a moment he saw not the traitor, not the witch, but the woman who had stood beside him in silence, who had touched the wounded, who had smiled like someone remembering how. He wanted to hate her. He couldn't. The cave pulsed, faint light rippling along the blade buried in the rock. The air shifted. The raven's cry echoed from somewhere deep within the stone. Einar turned toward the weapon. What is it? The relic of Freya's first oath, Astrid said, voice breaking into reverence and fear. A sword forged to end love and war alike. It sleeps until the 7th night, when its keeper must choose which to destroy. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Water dripped faster, then slower, then stopped altogether. The runes on the walls flared red, bright as living fire. Einar stepped forward despite himself. "It's waking." Astrid reached for him. "Don't." But it was too late. His hand brushed the hilt. A sound rose from the depths, not a roar, not a voice, but something vast and ancient exhaling after centuries of silence. The torch sputtered out. The cave filled with light, pale, golden, trembling, as if the sun itself had been trapped beneath the fjord. Astrid's scream was the last thing he heard before the world split open. The nights grew shorter. The air itself began to tremble, heavy with something unseen. The villagers whispered that the gods were awake again. They spoke of signs, of omens no one dared to name aloud. The first came with the fire. One evening, as Astrid sat weaving near the hearth, the flame flickered, hissed, and died, all at once. No wind. No draught. Just a silence so complete it seemed to swallow breath itself. When Einar struck flint to relight it, the spark refused to catch. The wood stayed cold, as if the fire had been commanded not to return. Then came the runes. Carved into the walls of the lodge, the same symbols Astrid once traced while whispering in the dark, they began to bleed. A thin, dark red trickle seeped from the grooves, slow and steady, like the house itself was mourning. The old women said it was a warning. The young men said it was a curse. Einar said nothing at all. Astrid weakened by the hour. Her hands, once steady and strong, trembled as if they belonged to someone else. Her eyes, still fierce, hid exhaustion behind every blink. When she spoke, her voice carried that echo, the one that belongs to those who have already been called from far away. On the morning of the 6th day the elders came to the door. Their faces were grave, their steps deliberate. They stood before Einar like judges from another world. "The dead is due," said the oldest of them. "The gods do not forget their oaths. The 7th night will claim her." Einar's hands clenched. "No. You speak of fate as if it were stone. But I have shattered stone before." The elder shook his head. "Not this one. What is carved by blood cannot be broken by flesh." He stepped closer, eyes piercing. "You can fight men, Einar of Ravenskull. But you cannot fight gods." Einar's voice dropped to a growl. "Then I will die trying." That night he sat beside Astrid as she slept. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. Yet even now she looked unafraid, peaceful, almost. She opened her eyes once, smiled faintly. "It's strange," she whispered, "how quiet the world becomes when it's almost over." "Don't speak like that." "I must." She reached for his hand. "You have to let me go." He shook his head, jaw tight. "I've let too many go already. My brother. My father. My home. You are where all of them led me. I won't lose you too." Tears welled in her eyes, and even then they glowed faintly in the firelight, like the sea reflecting the stars. "Einar," she murmured, "the gods will take me whether you wish it or not. I gave them my soul." "Then I'll go where they are," he said. "And I'll take it back." The wind rose outside, shrieking against the walls. The flame that had finally returned now danced violently, throwing monstrous shadows across the room. Astrid sat up, clutching his arm, eyes wide. "They're coming," she said. "Do you hear them?" He did. Voices not human, not whole. Whispers of old tongues carried through the storm. The ravens' cries cut through them like knives, circling above the roof. Einar stood, pulling Astrid close. "If they want you, they'll have to face me first." She pressed her forehead to his chest. "You can't fight what doesn't bleed." "Then I'll find a way to make it bleed." Lightning flashed, splitting the horizon in two. The door swung open as if torn by invisible hands. Wind and rain roared into the lodge. The fire was snuffed out. Only the runes glowed now, burning crimson, then gold, then white. Einar's eyes blazed with defiance. He lifted his axe, its blade gleaming in the unnatural light. "Freya," he shouted into the storm. "If this is your justice, then show yourself." Take me instead. For a long moment there was nothing, only wind, water, and the tremor of the earth. Then the air stilled. The ravens ceased their cries. And from the doorway a figure emerged, light spilling from her shape, half beauty, half void. Freya. Her voice filled the room and the bones inside it. You dare speak of exchange, mortal? You who took what was offered freely. Einar stepped forward, unflinching. She gave her soul to end war. I will give mine to keep her alive. That is the trade. The goddess tilted her head. Her eyes, both tender and cruel, fell on Astrid, trembling but standing beside him. Love, Freya said softly, is the purest lie men tell the gods. You cannot bargain with what already belongs to me. Einar gritted his teeth. Then curse me too. Bind me to her. But don't take her alone. The air shivered, as if even divinity hesitated. Freya looked at Astrid. He would follow you into death. Astrid nodded, tears streaming down her face. And I would follow him into life. The goddess smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, merely inevitable. Then so it shall be. A blinding light filled the lodge. The walls trembled. Einar felt himself torn between worlds, one foot on earth, one in the void. Astrid's hand slipped from his, and for an instant he saw her eyes turn gold, her skin glowing with divine fire. Then silence. When dawn came, the storm was gone. The village lay still, washed clean by rain and fear. Einar awoke on the floor beside the hearth, the ashes cold. The runes had stopped bleeding. And Astrid. She lay near the open door, her hair fanned across the floor like threads of sunlight. Her body shimmered faintly, wrapped in a golden glow that pulsed once, twice, and faded with the rising sun. Einar reached for her hand, warm for a moment, then still. He pressed it to his chest and whispered, They may take your soul, but your heart stays here. Outside, a single raven took flight, circling above the fjord before vanishing into the light. Night remembered the shape of her. One heartbeat she was in his arms. The next, the ritual flame rose like a living column and folded Astrid into its gold. No scream. No struggle. Just light, then absence, then a silence that rang like a struck bell. Einar did not weep. He knelt, hands open over ashes that still kept her warmth, and whispered a single command to the world, give her back. The world did not move. So he did what mortals do when doors won't open. He chose another wall to break. He made a circle on the floor with salt and soot. He cut his palm and let blood bead into the line, rubied stars in a black sky. He set the old runes in his mouth like seeds and spoke until breath turned thin. The fire hesitated. The air thickened. The lodge dropped away as if pulled from him like a cloak. He felt his body sag to the ground, then fall through it as through water, and the cold that met him was not of this earth. Dark first. Then a sky that wasn't a sky at all, green river light arcing above a field of frost that sang underfoot. Sound came like a memory returning, the slow wing beat of ravens, the distant surf of a sea too still to be honest, armor clicking in a rhythm older than prayer. Einar stood. He was lighter here, as if grief had weight and the spirit world was generous enough to hold it for a moment. Walk, said a voice that was also the wind. He did. Shapes rose in the aurora, skin and shadow both. Men he had cut down, boys he had spared, the scar-mouthed warlord whose face had chased him through winters. Judge me, Einar said, and the figures did not answer, only watched as he moved on. Their eyes were coins laid on the tongue of night. At the ridge, a woman waited, half crowned with falcon feathers, half haloed in void. Freya, and not the soft mercy of her songs. This was the blade behind the veil. The ground around her bloomed with little flowers of ice that opened and closed as if breathing. You came to bargain again, she said, amused and warning both. I came to take back what I can't live without. She tilted her head. Love makes the bravest liars. Do you know what she asked of me? Einar's jaw set. She asked for peace. She asked for you, Freya corrected, and there was a wound in the goddess's voice, thin as a hairline cracking glass. She said, "Spare the man who will kill me. Spare him and take me instead." The words hit him like the flat of an axe. "I never." "You would have," Freya said gently, terribly. "Not by steel. By oath. By choosing vengeance the day you first saw her face. Fate is not only dagger and blood, it is the small decision at the right moment. She bent yours away from the cut." Einar saw it then. The dozen places a different breath would have made him crueler. The field at dawn. The thread biting his wrist. The first night she traced hidden bones and he let the prayer finish. She had diverted him like a hand on a river. The knowing staggered him. He bowed, not to submit but to steady. "Test him," boomed another voice, iron on winter. The aurora split, and a tall figure walked out of it with wolves at his heels and a single eye bright as a star seen through smoke. The air tasted of iron and old bark. The All-Father raised a spear that cast no shadow. "3 measures," he said. "War. Love. Memory. If you break, you go back a hollow reed. If you stand, you go back with the truth you think you want." War came first. The field lifted out of ice like a coin from water. Einar stood again in the last clash, mud on his tongue, his brother's thong biting his wrist. Only now the choice forked in visible lines, bright threads crossing the air. Strike ruthlessly and win the war faster. Hold and spare 3 boys who would one day raid your daughter's village. Fall and your clan burns. He reached for rage, his hand closed on mercy. He altered nothing and everything, choosing the longer wound that heals cleaner. The scene unstitched. Love came as fire under rain. Astrid stood by the fjord, that half-smile that wasn't a smile and the private winter in her eyes. "If keeping me kills 10 others, do you still choose me?" the test asked, wearing her face in all the years they would never have. He tasted the selfish yes in his throat like hot metal. He swallowed. "I choose the living," he said, and the river of shame and relief that followed almost knocked him to his knees. The fire cooled. Memory was worst. It showed him an old woman's hands, his mother's, tying a small rune into his cloak. "Strength isn't loud," she'd said. "Hold softly." Then it showed him Stig's laugh, brittle over fear, Grettir's single eye, tired with the arithmetic of winter, boys chanting cruel rhymes and stopping when she lifted her gaze. He wanted to hold all of it. Memory said, "Let some go or drown." He opened his fist. His brother's face floated up. He let even that slide into the dark with a whisper, "Rest." The field cleared. Odin lowered the spear. "You do not break," he said, and the approval in his voice was colder than contempt. "It would have been easier if you had." Freya stepped closer. For a blink, her divinity softened, and he saw the grief of a god who collects lovers and leaves. "You are not here to win," she said. "You are here to understand why she lied." Einar breathed once, twice. "Because love is not mercy. It is choosing one life at the cost of your own." Freya's smile was the edge of a cup and the edge of a blade. "Go then. Take the last thing mortals are ever given." The green light folded into itself, and the world changed texture, snow to silk, iron to breath. He stood in a field that could not exist, grass of starlight, a wind that sounded like lullabies sung by ships, a horizon that curved toward him like an embrace. Astrid waited there, barefoot, hair loose, the frost lilies bowing when she passed. He did not run. He walked. They met in the middle like 2 decisions finally arriving at the same answer. She touched his cheek. "You found the way," she said, wonder and sorrow braided tight. "I broke nothing," he answered. "I learned what you broke for me." Her eyes shone, not tears, light remembering it was water once. "I lied to them," she admitted, voice small in the endlessness. "I said you would kill me so they would spare you. I chose a story where I ended and you didn't." "You chose wrong for the right reason," he said, and it felt like absolution spoken into his own chest as much as into hers. They stood quiet. The kind of quiet that finishes a prayer. He memorized everything, the small scar by her lip, the way her breath hitched before she smiled, the weight of her head against his chest that first night she let herself sleep. "Come back with me," he said, daring the impossible as mortals always do. She shook her head. "The path is paved. If I step back, 10 paths break. But listen, Valhalla is not just a hall. It is any place where the brave are remembered correctly. Put me there." She pressed his blood-marked palm to her heart. "Live so I don't vanish." "Then wait for me," he whispered. "Where the sky looks like a river, where the grass sings. Wait." "I will," she said, and her smile carried spring in it, the kind that hurts because it must end. "And when the doors open and the horns sound, I will turn, and you will already be walking toward me." The field brightened. The air thinned. He felt the pull, the old world calling like a harbor. They kissed once, not to promise but to anchor, and light poured through them both like dawn poured through a forest. He woke on the lodge floor, cheek against cold ash. Morning bled through the door, pale and clean. His palm still bore the cut, but the blood had dried in a pattern that was not a scab. It was a rune he had not seen before, a small curve and a line. "Keep but do not cage." Outside the ravens called. Not warning this time, witness. He rose different. Lighter where rage had lived. He stepped to the threshold and looked at the fjord, at the village that would need timber and fish and new stories, at the sky that had learned his name. He did not speak to the gods. He did not need to. He tied his brother's thong tighter, laid Astrid's pendant over his heart, and walked into a day that would remember him, and her, honestly. Years thinned the sharp edges of the war, but they did not erase its outline. The fjord learned quieter mornings. Nets came up heavy with silver. Doors were left unbarred even on storm nights. Children grew up with stories that did not begin with a raid. And when the longhouse filled with winter smoke and music, the first song people asked for was never a victory hymn. It was the one about the woman who stepped into fire, and the man who followed her into a place no road could reach. Einar did not seize a chieftain's chair. He built benches. He argued for fair shares of pasture and fish, for fences to be mended on the side of the neighbor who had fewer sons, for debt to be a bridge and not a chain. When a quarrel flared, he listened first and swung later, and even then he swung his judgment like a blacksmith, not a reaper. The scar on his palm, the rune he woke with after crossing the other side, faded to a pale crescent and line, but its meaning held. Keep but do not cage. He kept the peace like a flame cupped against wind. He caged nothing, not even grief. On the first spring after Astrid vanished into the ritual fire, he built a cairn on the ridge that overhung the fjord. Not a grave, it had no body to hold, but a keeping place for names. He set one smooth stone for his brother, one for the boys he spared in the last clash, one for Grettir's dead eye that had seen too much winter, and one for Astrid, carved not with title or lineage but with a line she taught him. Dead is what remains when love has already given everything. The ravens perched on the highest rocks and watched, not as judges, not as omens, but as witnesses who knew the ledger had, at last, been balanced without another blade. People say the gods grew quieter here. That the storms came with more warning, that the ice broke kinder. Einar never claimed credit. When asked, he would only lift the pendant he wore under his shirt, the silver circlet he found on a burned field, and tap it once against his chest as if to say, "Ask her." On the 7th night after each harvest, he stood alone by the water, counting breaths with the tide, and let memory come as it would. Sometimes it smelled like smoke, sometimes it tasted like salt, sometimes it arrived with a pulse of warmth at his lips, as if a kiss had survived a continent of silence to find him again. He would whisper into the wind, not a prayer, not a bargain, only the truth, "I'm still walking." The children of both clans grew up together, and the old song shifted a degree, less iron, more ash turned to soil. When the Skald sang Astrid's name, they did not call her the enemy's daughter. They called her the keeper of oaths that saved those who didn't deserve saving yet. They sang how she lied to the gods not to win but to spare. In their verses, Freya's tears were not gold but seeds, and where they fell, wildflowers rose, stubborn against frost. Years make even miracles ordinary if you let them. Einar refused to. He told the story properly. Not the tidy version, but the one with wrong turns and tests that almost broke him, with a goddess who could be merciful and cruel in the same sentence, with a one-eyed god who taught him to carry memory like water instead of iron. He did not pretend he never wanted to choose the shorter, easier path. He said out loud that he had almost failed. People listened harder to a man who bent and did not snap. Sometimes he dreamed of the field of starlit grass. He woke with the strange, healing ache of a runner who sees the finish in the distance and understands for the first time that the point was never the line but the stride. He rose before dawn, walked the shore, and let the sea write and erase old scripts at his feet. He practiced the living until it fit again. On the night the aurora returned in a ribboned crown, the village lit lanterns along the ridge. They lined the path to the cairn with bowls of oil and salt and set bread where names were carved. Einar stepped forward and spoke as if telling the story to a friend who had just come in from the cold. He held nothing back. When he reached the part where the cave woke and Astrid confessed the bargain, he did not lower his voice. When he reached the place where she vanished in light, he did not raise it. He let the words find their own height. "And what did the gods give you in return?" A boy asked, blunt, brave, the way boys are when they think truth is something you can catch with both hands. "Nothing I asked for," Einar said. "Everything I needed." "Did you win?" the boy pressed. Einar looked at the sky, at the long green wound the lights stitched and unstitched across the dark. "No," he said. "I learned how to lose correctly." The boy frowned and Einar smiled. "That's how you beat gods. You refuse to become smaller because of them." Before they left the ridge, he set one more stone. Not for the dead. For the future. He carved into it a rune of his own, clumsy and plain: walk. Generations after, people touched that stone before voyages as if it were a helm. The day Einar finally fell, it was not to war but to winter. He went into the snow with a fisherman's rope in his hand and a skald's words on his tongue. He sat under the birches, those same western birches he had promised would let Astrid hear wails when the season turned, and he watched the fjord breathe. A raven hopped close, bold. He held out a palm and it stepped onto the warmth, light as a last thought. He closed his eyes without dread. The world narrowed to a sound he had heard once: grass singing. He said, "I'm coming," not loudly, and the wind carried it ahead. They laid him beside the cairn, under a sky that released snow in a hush. They did not burn him with a hero boat, though some argued for the old custom. They kept him near the ridge so the children could point and the lovers could sit and the tired could lean. They told it right, that he defied the gods by loving one woman properly, that he learned mercy where rage wanted a home, that he returned from the spirit field with a gentler strength that did not ask permission to be enough. And in the longhouse, when the lanterns swung and the meat kept hands warm and storytellers found their best breath, someone always ended the tale the same way: a voice from the shadowed corner, a line carried like a torch from mouth to mouth. Some loves are born of blood, others of the soul. And when both meet, even the gods listen. If this story found you at the right time, carry it forward. Tell me below. When the easy anger called your name, what pulled you back toward mercy? If you stood on that ridge with Einar, wind in your chest, the sea counting your breaths, what promise would you keep and what would you refuse to cage? Share your echo in the comments, pass this legend to someone who needs a braver ending, and if you want more tales that reckon with fate, love, and the price of both, stay, there are other fires waiting.